How many of us really look at our lives and recognize that we have some emotions that continually flare up? Sometimes it's good if we have those happy emotions and that joy. But when we have those negative emotions, whether it be anger, whether it be anxiety, whether it be frustration, all of those types of things, the key aspect that I think is so interesting is that we literally can take control of those. This concept of being able to be a conscious co-creator of your own life, I think is so important. And I'm really pleased to have on the show today a gentleman by the name of Mark Halpern. He's a chiropractor. He has an interesting story about his own life and the struggle that he's had with anxiety, and how over the years of his studying and going through different types of expertise with people on how to overcome that, he has put together an amazing package of how to literally gain control of that to where you can really live a life of coherence and really a life of happiness and joy. So hope you'll join us. I think you'll really enjoy the show.
At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Mark, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Hey, it's good to have you on the show. I really appreciate it. Hey, listen, you had quite an interesting journey. And, you talk about what you experienced with anxiety and how it was affecting your entire life and how you were kind of compensating for that with a bunch of adrenaline activities and so on and so forth. I'd love for you to share with the audience your story and
Sure.
what brought you to the point where you have started to really work towards this coherence revolution.
Well, I just turned 50 last year, a big milestone for me. But my story really, up until the age of maybe 12 or 13, somewhere in the, grade 6, 7 age bracket, everything was great in my life. I mean, I had good family, good friends. I felt socially adjusted. In my mind, no one would have been aware that I was developing any bad mental habits or, mental health problems. But I would say somewhere in around grade 6 or grade 7, I started going through puberty, and some of the insecurities that come with being in junior high and high school started to surface. And I think, as I look back, what I realized I was doing was just practicing these terrible thinking habits over and over and over. Our minds, start to race on different issues, and insecurities pop up. And because I really didn't speak to anybody, no one really spoke about mental health back in the late 70s and 80s. Didn't really speak to my parents very much about this kind of stuff. So as a teenager, I just kind of slogged along and developed really bad ruminating and insecurities that just kept building over and over. And what I found was, without realizing it, they just became these ingrained neurological patterns, that it was like this pattern that just kept reoccurring. I'd have a thought, the thought would make me anxious, then I'd develop anxiety, and the anxiety would get worse, and then that would create more thoughts. And it was just this pattern that kept happening over and over. Really, this went into my 20s and in my 30s. When I was in my 20s, I was in chiropractic college, and it was really all about anxiety in almost every situation. So whereas some people would get mad or angry or sad, I really lost the ability to differentiate my emotions. It was just all anxiety, and it all sort of developed the same way, or expressed itself the same way. And so, being the type of person I was from the time of about 18 years old, I set out on a discovery to see how I could get rid of anxiety. And, I'm part spiritual and part science, and I've always been that way. And so I approached it from every Western-based type of philosophy, whether it was medication, whether it was cognitive behavioral therapy, psychotherapy. But I also went the Eastern-based approach and did everything from homeopathy and naturopathy to going to people who used quantum methods, people who did energy work, people who did past life regression. I mean, I think I covered the gamut of just about everything there was. And my idea was that I would finally figure out what the anxiety was, why it was being caused. I'd fix that problem, and then I'd move on with my life as if everything was going to be great after that. And what inevitably would happen is you get excited about some new method or some new therapist or some new treatment, and you'd have hope. And then 2-3 months would go by because they'd say it takes you time, and you'd go through the process. And sure enough, after 2-3 months, I'd be disappointed. I didn't get where I needed to get to. I had a little bit of results, but not a lot of results. And, so I just kept stopping different things and trying others. And it just kept going. In my 30s, I got married and I had kids. My practice was developing, but this was still the background. And anxiety really on the surface, no one knew, but it was always underneath. And so my close friends and family knew really what was going on for the most part, but the outside world wouldn't know, and my patients wouldn't know. And it was always this putting on a good front and just trying to make people believe I was okay, when inside really what I felt was a ton of anxiety. And, it was funny. It really took the pandemic to put everything together. I would say over the last 5 or 6 years, I had done a lot of different things. One of them being meditation work with Dr. Joe Dispenza, which was really helpful for me. Another was learning and becoming a certified trainer in HeartMath principles, which we can talk about, and a bunch of other things that really took my life in a different direction. And then I remember directly, it was March 15th, 2020. Me and my 2 fellow chiropractors in my office, we had done a renovation, and it was time to come back to work. And so we went into the office to open up and, launch this new practice. And we were told to go home because it was the pandemic and everybody was going to be locked down now for an indeterminate amount of time. It could have been weeks, it could have been months. And so I realized that this was just not going to be good for me. I was going to sit there, and the uncertainty was never good for anybody, let alone I got a lot of triggers around uncertainty. And so I determined this was not going to get me. And so what I determined to do was go through everything that I'd ever tried, the good and the bad. I went through every book that I'd ever written, and all those pages that had been flipped over in the corner that I was going to come back to someday. Well, this was the day. So in March of 2020, in March and April and May, I was reviewing everything I'd ever done, and I started writing. And I really didn't know what I was writing. I just started writing my story, writing things that helped me, writing things that didn't help me. And eventually it turned into the book, Coherence Revolution. And because I was so impacted by these techniques, by HeartMath, which are breathwork techniques, I thought, I don't know how long we're going to be locked down, but I think I can help people get through this time by teaching this online. But I don't want to just do a course on just the breathwork. Not that it's not enough unto itself, but I had more to share. And so I put together the online course, which is a 6-week course, where you learn the breath work, but you go through all the concepts in the book, which is really about how to create coherence or balance in your nervous system by using your senses, by using the world around you, by using nature, by doing the self-inquiry to know what works for you, what helps you become balanced and what things don't. And so that as you go through that, the self-discovery process of the course, by the end of it, you're able to actually create a document for yourself, which I call a daily time schedule. And it's not only about what you're going to do with your life or on a daily basis, it's the emotions that you want to feel on a daily basis. And the idea is to start to practice the emotions of your dream life, so that eventually the emotions that you're practicing become so familiar to you, that the life you want to lead becomes so familiar to you, that the chance of you attaining it is much greater. And so that's really what the Coherence Revolution was all about. It was my ability to go back, figure out what worked, what didn't work, and then I can share it with people, because I feel at this point, I probably have a lot of experience that could save people a lot of time and probably a lot of money in terms of how to take care of their own mental health and be able to self-regulate.
Well, and it's interesting, as you said, you've been through so many different, different programs all over the place, and I've done the same thing. So I totally get what you're saying, and yet as you went back and created this, now you talk about the breathing, and let's talk. We can talk a little bit more about that. But as you say with your book, ultimately, that was not just the only thing that was making it work. I'm assuming that there are a lot other entities that you have incorporated that have allowed you to do that. Now, you did that back in 2020. We're getting into 2022. when did you find it actually was taking effect for you, and how long has it been?
Well, I would say my evolution started probably 6, 7, 8 years ago. I've been using HeartMath for probably 15 years, but the first 5 or so years, it was one of those things that I didn't really get. I didn't really conceptualize. I didn't embody it. But let's say a decade ago, I started using it more as a tool to help me. And then in the last 5 years, not only using HeartMath, but using meditation, and using the different systems I talk about in the book, which is how to use the world around you. I would say my life has changed drastically over the last 3 to 5 years using these processes. So when I wrote it in 2020, it was more of a, how can I put this so I can help other people? How can I put this in a system that not only will help me, but it'll be logical for other people to follow? And we actually did a beta test group that this past summer in 2021, where we put a whole bunch of people through the course and got their responses. And to my delight, people were having transformations that were really amazing, because although the 6-week course, it's enough to get into it, it's not enough to fully embody it. You've got to practice it. You've got to start practicing the life that you want to lead. You have to start being committed to the life that you want to lead and making a change. But anybody that really wants to put in the effort can make a good change within even the first few weeks, simply if you start to implement what you're practicing.
Interesting. Well, so let's kind of go through the book and talk about some of these elements. Obviously, in the short time that we have, it hopefully is going to just instill some interest in people to do that. One thing I want to talk about before we get started, though, is, I think a lot of people are resistant to change, even though it's changed for the better.
Yes.
And one of the things you talk about, and I've been fascinated by, is this concept of the neurological patterns and how literally we can change. I think so many people think, what, I can't change. You'll never, and we get that message sometimes from friends, family, teachers, parents, what, you're never going to be able to do this. You're never going to be able to do that. Talk a little bit about what your experience has been from the standpoint of understanding those neurological pathways and how literally, and by the way, the fact that you're talking about how you're writing things down and then actively doing some things, I know is part of changing that. But talk a little bit about, how does one, first of all, understand these neurological pathways and the fact that they're not set in stone. They're not set in our skull, in our brain. We can literally change them if we so desire and so choose.
Absolutely. And I've been thinking about it for many years about how to understand this process. And I remember it was probably my first week-long event in 2016 or 17 with Dr. Joe when he was doing these meditation retreats. And he was talking about this concept of anxiety being an addiction. And I was just sitting there with my jaw on the ground going, this really applies to me, because we do it without thinking. We have a thought pattern, and then that pattern creates a chemical cascade in our brains of stress hormones. And those stress hormones produce a feeling of anxiety in the body. And then that creates more thinking, because you're going, what's wrong with me? Why am I feeling this anxiety? So now you're thinking again. And it becomes this pattern of thinking, release of chemical, feel anxiety, thinking, release of chemical. And you literally become addicted to it. And most people who suffer with anxiety can attest to, you solve one problem and you feel okay about it. Your brain is scanning your life for the next problem, because it literally wants the infusion of that adrenal rush and all those chemicals. And even though it's not good for you, your body expects them. And when you get literally used to anxiety, it becomes your set point. And so literally everything can trigger, all those triggers, whether it's about your family or your job or, your friends or whatever it is, they can be set off by less and less. I would be, when I went through a divorce 10 years ago, I started getting emails from a lawyer. And originally I had to read the actual email. And if it was something bad, it would stress me out. It got to the point where just hearing the email in my inbox could set off an anxiety response, I didn't have to read the email anymore. It was a neurological pattern. You see the email, boom, it sets off the response. And so once you grasp that and you go, okay, it's not the actual thing that I'm worrying about. It's this cascade of events that I've got to break. And that's called a neurological interrupt. And I talk about that in the course a little bit. I mean, a neurological interrupt can be listening to music, someone slapping, clapping their hands in front of your head. People wear elastics where they snap it and it sort of shocks them. But the idea is that these neurological patterns can be broken as soon as you understand that they are programs. And so my approach using something like HeartMath, which involves breath work, visualization, and emotion, is you start to practice different emotional states. And, you said one thing you said was really true, is that it feels impossible. The energy it feels to make that step when you are feeling anxious is extremely hard to do. Except that if you can summon up enough energy, you can literally get rid of anxiety in a split second. I've been to so many therapists that have said to me, oh, you'll be fine. It's going to take 6 months, a year, 2 years, or give it time. And it was always about time. But I use this example in my book, and I think it's very powerful because I know it's applies to me, and I'm sure to other people. If you think about a time that you were at home, maybe you were anxious or depressed, maybe you're crying, you're freaking out, you're angry, whatever the emotion is. Let's say you're at home on your own and you're really struggling. And then someone comes to the door and you hear your doorbell ring. Your initial reaction is to kind of, pull up your thing and wipe your tears off or whatever you got to do. And you summon up this energy and you open the door. And in that moment, you're not anxious. You're not depressed. You are engaging with the person. You're in the moment. You're not thinking about anything that's happened or that's going to happen. And if you're being honest with yourself, you probably feel pretty good in that 30 seconds to a minute, even though part of you wants to just shut the door so you can go back and break down again. The idea is that you were able to get rid of the anxiety almost instantly by just, pulling yourself together. And this is why, you start off the interview by saying I used to do crazy things, whether it was skydiving or jumping out of an airplane or scuba diving or what have you. I didn't do those things because I was an adrenaline junkie. Because I felt so much anxiety all the time, I didn't get extra anxiety for jumping off a cliff or extra anxiety for jumping out of a plane. I was already anxious, so it didn't make me more anxious. But what it did do was put me in the moment, and it forced me into the moment. And the only place that personally I never felt anxiety was right in the moment. So I did anything that really could facilitate that in a way that inspired me so that I could be in the moment as much as possible. And I get the same response when I'm with my patients. If I'm with a patient and I'm really there with them, I don't feel anxiety. And that's why I think my patient base actually saved me when I was going through my 30s and going through my divorce, because when I was with them and I was helping them, I felt no anxiety because I was in the moment and I wasn't anywhere else. It's usually when you're thinking about the future that you're feeling anxious. And if you're thinking about the past, you're kind of feeling depressed. The only place that you're kind of feeling okay is right here and right now. And so that's really what even the Coherence Revolution is all about, is how do you get yourself in the moment? And so the way to start changing your physiological response is you start to analyze your world around you. Is there a smell that you can have in the morning that might uplift you? And is there a different smell in the evening that might relax you? Is there something visually that you want to look at on your desk to inspire you? Is there music that you want to play at certain times of the day that's going to either uplift you, relax you, put you in different moods, right? Are there different clothing that you wear, that different materials that feel good on your body? Some material might make you feel professional. Other material might make you feel cozy. The idea is that you're using the world around you to change your physiological response and get into a different, more uplifting mood, whether it's gratitude or love or at peace or however you want to describe it. And so it's all about practicing these things to change your physiological response.
Well, and you mentioned the fact that that anxiety is a habit. And, I think about all of the habits that we've developed over the years in our lives, and some are good and some are not necessarily healthy, smoking, drinking a lot of alcohol or whatever that happens to be. And we look at that and and we think, well, okay, that's a habit. But I'm not sure many of us understand or realize that the emotions that we continually feel, whether it's anger, whether it's anxiety, is merely a habit. I mean, we see what's going on throughout the world right now. And, particularly, here in the United States, we see such anger, we see such, all of these things going on that we've never really ever seen to this degree before. And as we look at that, I guess the question, is it just a habit? Are these people just experiencing habits that literally, if they so choose, can literally change those habits into something of a more positive, peaceful, caring, loving nature?
I think there is no question that it can be changed because they are habits and patterns, but I don't want to belittle it. They are powerful habits.
Yes.
The triggers that I have had, they're not easy, and some of them are gone now. Now that I've done this work, I don't experience them anymore, but some of them do. I still have old triggers, but now they're muted, or I know how to get rid of them. Instead of it taking days of anxiety, it might be an hour of anxiety. And so the idea is that these are powerful things, but they are habits and they are behaviors that can be changed. And the idea is you have to have someone that is willing and open, because again, there's a fine line between blame. Because as soon as you say it's a habit, then you start to blame yourself for having the anxiety. Well, some of these things have developed when we were children, when we were teenagers. We're not to blame for them. But as soon as you understand that you've helped create them by continuing to behave in these certain ways. I remember when I was a teenager, I used to believe subconsciously and consciously that if I made someone aware of how much they upset me, then they would feel bad and apologize, in that vein. And what you realize is that no one ever sees it the way you do. And you're looking at it in sort of a skewed way. And people have their own problems. They're looking at the situation completely differently. And all of a sudden, I had this belief that was based upon not reality, but I kept doing it over and over. And eventually it became to the point where I get so anxious if someone did something I didn't approve of towards me. And all of a sudden it's their fault, but it's not their fault. I was the one behaving this way. I was the one allowing the process to occur.
Well, and you're right. I mean, I didn't mean to belittle the fact, and it's really true that much of what we experience in our adult life has to do with things that we subconsciously experienced based on our own perception of what was going on in our early life. I know I had a client that was just making all sorts of silly decisions. And he finally said, Doug, I need to really talk to you. And I used some NLP, which you're familiar with, I'm sure. Yeah. And it was interesting because as we went back to the point where we identified a time when he was in grade school where he had been affected by something that the teacher had done and said, and his perception was that he was just no good, that he was stupid, he was no good, that type of thing. That was completely out of his control. It was just his perception. Now, as we went back and reframed that, it changed his whole life.
Yeah.
But the reality is so that we can't take, we shouldn't feel this guilt, the shame, all of this type of thing, that whatever our behavior is. I think the point that you're bringing up is that, at some point in time, yeah, they're powerful, but we can become aware that what we're experiencing is not what we want to experience. Right. And then let's get back and figure out what's going on. So let's talk about your book just a bit. Let's go through how many chapters are in the book?
I don't even know, 20 some odd chapters, I believe, but it's a fairly short book. I know that it's divided into sections. And so the first section is my story. It's all about sort of who I am in my journey. And in the second, it's really about all the things that I did or didn't do, or things that work, things that didn't work. And so people could save themselves a lot of hassle by either, not doing the things that are not worthwhile and perhaps following some of the things that did work. And then the last part is going through all the different types of coherence, from visual to olfactory to smell and taste, and visual and auditory. So all of the different types of coherence. And then there's worksheets that come with it that you can be guided through to do the self-inquiry. It's all about figuring out what works for you, so that at the end of the book and the course, you're provided a template to put together a schedule for yourself that not only has what you're going to do, but the emotions that you want to feel. And so the book allows you to go through it at your own pace, but it doesn't teach you like the course does. Like the course teaches HeartMath. It doesn't just mention HeartMath. In the 6 weeks, you're going to be learning all of the different HeartMath tools. It gives you the chance to dive into the different sounds and different sites. We do some painting, we do some listening to different sounds. And so it's really practical. You dive into the work by doing the course, but the two really go hand in hand together. So you can read the book and do the course together, or just do the book, or just do the course. It doesn't really matter. But if you want to learn the techniques and really dive into it, you need to do the course, because the book doesn't teach HeartMath the way we do live.
Let's talk about HeartMath.
Sure.
You've used that terminology a lot, so help the
Yes.
audience to understand what
Sure.
what do you mean by HeartMath?
HeartMath. HeartMath is a company, and they were born sort of in the, I think, early 90s. And HeartMath is originally they learned and they discovered these tools to use using your breath and emotion without any of the science behind it. And what's been great is over the last 30 years, with doing research all over the world and on different on the planet, the electromagnetic field, on our own electromagnetic field, on our human heart, they found a lot of really cool discoveries. One of them is that there's something that we have called heart rate variability. Heart rate variability is that when you breathe in, your heart rate goes up, and when you breathe out, your heart rate goes down. The difference is called your heart rate variability. So for instance, if I take a breath in, my heart rate might go up to 90 beats a minute. When I breathe out, my heart rate might go down to 70. So 90 minus 70 would be 20 HRV, heart rate variability. The larger your HRV, the more adaptable you are to life, the more resilient you are. And in fact, the longer you live. They've done mortality studies and show that the greater your HRV, the greater you live. Now, when you're younger, naturally your HRV is bigger. And as you get older, it sort of gets smaller. And that's for a couple of reasons, not only age, but also because we start developing into chest breathers, where we're doing shallow breaths with our chest. And we have kind of like a jagged heart rhythm. But as you start to breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth, and you create a tummy breathing, where you're creating a nice sine wave, breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out. So you create a sine wave, and your HRV elongates. And then when you start to add to that visualizing, and you start to add to that emotion and bringing in a positive emotion, you start to enter what's called physiological coherence. It's a state of balance. You'll notice athletes will say they feel like they're in the zone. That's physiological coherence. Time slows down. When you are meeting some friends and there's someone that you just need to go speak to and give them a hug, you feel a coherent feeling. And likewise, when someone is repelling you, you feel it. That's an incoherence. And so the idea is physiological coherence is when your heart rhythm starts to entrain your brain rhythm, starts to entrain all the rhythms of your body. And because your heart's electromagnetic field electrically, your heart is at least 40 times stronger than your brain. And so as you start getting your heart rhythm into a nice, coherent rhythm, you start to entrain the parts of the brain that deal with comprehension and pain and sleep and stress. And so now you're starting to get your brain into a coherent rhythm. And once your heart and brain get in coherence with each other, that starts to affect your digestive rhythm and your lung rhythm, and every other cell vibration in your body can come into physiological coherence. And it's not a theoretical state. When you are there, you feel it. Like when the first time I ever experienced it, I was looking for this zone. And when I hit it, you feel it. And so the cool thing about HeartMath is they have books, they have technology. You don't need any of them. You can just learn how to do the breathing if you'd like, or you can read a book, which is very helpful, or you can get their biofeedback technology where there's actually a heart rhythm monitor that goes on your ear or your finger, and there's games and different types of biofeedback to teach you how to get into coherence. And so in my course, this is what we focus on, is how to utilize this breath work with emotion to change your physiological state.
Well, that was fascinating. I started smiling when you were talking about, and so often I was just thinking while we were talking, and as we've been talking, I'm thinking about my breathing, and you're right, it's chest. And then I think, oh, okay, wait a minute. And for me, it's the stomach and the back, to where my back expands down near the waist. And I smile because my dad was a classical voice teacher, taught at Northwestern University over in Illinois. And I remember that part of when I said, Dad, I want to learn to sing a little bit better. And one of the first things he said was, you're not breathing right.
Right.
You need to take those deep, deep breaths. You need to feel that. He'd put his hands on my stomach and on my back, breathe in and feel it expand. And so, that's fascinating. I had never thought about that until you just mentioned it. But I think what's really interesting to me is that as you are saying that as you learn to breathe that way, and it has to be, oh my goodness, a conscious thing. And I assume that it's not the way that we breathe all day long, but it can be a conscious way. And then all of a sudden you are applying different modalities, you're doing different things under those conditions. Is that what literally is able to change the neurological pathways? Is that the thing that you are literally consciously changing, quote, habits in a way that ultimately the neural pathways take over and push the other ones to the side?
So the answer to that is yes. I tell my patients to practice in non-stressful situations, 2 or 3 minutes in the morning, 2 or 3 minutes in the evening, throughout the day, wherever you are. But then when you get into stressful situations, to try and start to utilize it. But it's interesting, the story I like to tell in my book is about the first time I ever felt physiological coherence. I had already had the equipment for probably a couple of years. I was breathing, but I think all I was doing was hyperventilating and sometimes feeling dizzy. And I remember you put the sensor on your finger or on your ear. And when you get into a nice rhythm and you've hit coherence, it makes a bing and it goes green. And so the idea is it can be a little frustrating, which is antithetical to what you're doing, because you're trying to get into coherence. But if you're doing everything properly and the biofeedback equipment isn't changing, then you're sitting there getting frustrated saying, what am I doing wrong here, right? So I remember there was one time, it was probably about 10 years ago, I was sitting on my bed and I was in an anxious state trying to get more coherent. And I was breathing in and out through my chest. I was visualizing a calm blue ocean. I was visualizing a beach. I was visualizing clouds, anything I could think of to get into a more relaxed or balanced state, and nothing was working. And so I just kind of thought to myself, what can I think about here and feel? Because it's not about the thinking, it's about the feeling. So in that moment, I just remember thinking about my daughter, who was about 6 years old at the time. She jumped into my arms and I felt the hug. I felt her arms go around my body. I felt her kissing my cheek. I felt the warmth. I literally was there in the hug with her. And it didn't even take 2 or 3 seconds. The machine immediately went to green. It went that bing sound, and I felt chills almost. I just felt this feeling come over me, and it was an inspired feeling. I felt energy. I felt great. I felt hopeful. And I thought, this is it. This is the physiological state I've been trying to attain. And it was that moment that it was so pivotal for me, because I think up to that point, until you feel it, it's just a theory, or it's just a concept. But once you feel it, then you go, oh, this is what I'm trying to achieve. Now I'm feeling this feeling. And so now it becomes easier and easier to get back to that physiological coherent state, because you've been there and you know what you're trying to get to and how you did it and all that. And so when people talk to me about visualizing, or they have a vision board and they're, they want their dreams to come true, but they're frustrated because their dreams aren't coming true, they're thinking too much. It is less about thinking and it's more about feeling. If you want a new home, you have to feel the kitchen that you were going to be cooking in, the emotion that you're going to feel while you're in that kitchen, or while you're driving your new car, or while you're holding the hand of your loved one, or whatever it is you're trying to attract into your life. It is much more about the emotional response than it is about the visualization of it. And so it's about practicing that emotional response while doing the breath work, which is HeartMath.
Okay. And the one thing that you talked about, you say near the end, you have a bunch of exercises and so forth. So here's my question. And, you bring up the vision boards and all of that, and you're right. I mean, we can have those vision boards. In fact, I was speaking with someone who was part of the original movie. All right. And later on, as we were talking, he says, what we realized is that it's one thing to have that visualization. It's another thing to have the visualization and then actually activate yourself to where you're doing things so that you can actually accomplish that visualization. Right. It just doesn't happen. So as you talk about the exercises that people are starting to do based on, your program and so forth, do you find that being able to actively do things is part of what starts to change that neurological pathway so that you actually start to develop the habits of not having anxiety, not having frustration, not having anger?
Yes. And in fact, it is about designing it specifically for you. So for instance, and I was talking the other day with my wife about this, that kids are just so much easier because they don't have these barriers. But one of the things that people can do, if you are always feeling down and you wake up in the morning and you're feeling anxious, literally the act of going to a mirror and smiling, the muscles that are programmed to smile stimulate endorphin release in the brain. And so there's a connection between the muscles of smiling and in your brain. And so literally, if you can get yourself to go to a mirror and just start to smile, you will release endorphins, which will then start to break the anxiety pattern and break the mood that you're in. But to get an adult who's miserable to go to a mirror and smile is very hard. It seems like the hardest thing to do. Meanwhile, you ask a kid to do it, they're going to go and make funny faces in front of the mirror all day because they don't have that hang up about it. But to get adults to take small steps can be challenging. And that's one of the reasons that I like not only breath work, but HeartMath, is because sometimes it takes a little bit of something to get you to do more of something. And the first time you take a breath in through your chest, forget about doing proper breathing, forget about doing any of the other stuff. If you just took a pause in your life and did a big breath in through your stomach and just visualize the oxygen going into your chest, fill up your tummy like a big balloon, and you do that 3 or 4 times, you will already have started to change your physiological state, and you'll be in a different state to make a decision or to decide what your next step is. And so a lot of times, the first thing I have people do is just to pause, recognize they are not okay in the moment, and take a few breaths, nothing more, simply because that's the first step to just changing where you're at, recognizing it. And so you have to at least be committed to the fact of knowing I'm not satisfied where I am and I'm willing to do something about it. And if you can get to that point where you're at least saying, okay, I'm willing, then there's lots of little steps. It could be, one of the things we do is I have people do an exercise where they spend a half hour a day, a couple times a week, going through all different types of music. And the idea is that you want to know in your toolbox of things, what type of songs are going to uplift you, which ones are going to relax you, which ones are going to put you in a good mood. And so it might be as simple as saying, God, I'm in a bad mood and I'm feeling anxious, but I know this song makes me feel better. And you just go and put the song on. Simple step, just put it on. But I guarantee you by the end of that song, start tapping your toe or, whatever it is, you're in a different physiological state than you were 10 minutes ago. And now the problem that you're thinking about doesn't seem quite the same, and you might be able to figure it out or do the, work you got to do. And so it really is about creating a toolbox. So in the moment, you have as many things to stop the reaction, the neurological interrupt, and then to choose another response. And so you have to have other responses. And that's where this self-inquiry comes. What is it that you're going to do? Perhaps you got to go take a walk, phone a certain person, go take a shower, meditate. It could be any number of things for you. But the idea is that you figure it out so that you don't have any excuses anymore of I'm stuck in this physiological state.
And as you mentioned, even about yourself, you start to move away from some of those. There are still some that are sitting there in the subconscious that keep rearing their heads through the emotions and so forth. But do you find that overall, as you practice this, and as you've worked with the different people as they practice it, that at some point in time, the pendulum changes from the negative emotions to more of the positive emotions each day, which then I would assume makes it much easier to handle the negative ones when they come up?
I can speak for myself personally. If 24 hours a day was anxiety, it becomes less and it becomes less and it becomes less and it becomes hours, and sometimes it becomes minutes, and sometimes you go and you realize, wow, I haven't been anxious for a couple of days. But it's really not about always avoiding the anxiety, because once you've reframed the whole thing, most people, it's my anxiety, right? It's like they own it. It's the anxiety that is me almost. It's not my anxiety. It's a state of anxiety that I'm in because of A, B, and C, but that doesn't have to be your set point anymore. So your immediate set point can start to change. It can be much easier to get out of the anxiety, and you will start to have periods of time where anxiety is not even part of your equation anymore. It becomes less about the anxiety and more about creating coherence. And I think, are you trying to get unsad or are you trying to get happy? And so the more you focus on getting rid of anxiety, you're still focusing on anxiety. The more that you're focusing on getting coherent, now it's all about coherence in your life, making and doing the things that are going to create new patterns. And so for me, my whole life was about anxiety. Now my whole life is about coherence. And so anxiety is a small part of it. So it does make that shift, because it's exciting for people who have been anxious or overwhelmed or feeling depressed. When you start to find a few things that work for you, it's life-changing. And just the fact that you feel hope, just the fact that you start feeling inspiration, you've already reduced your symptoms 50% because now there is hope. And so to me, it's a wheel, and it keeps spinning and it keeps picking up momentum one way, but it can go back the other way. That's why you have to have this toolbox. You've got to keep your momentum going in that way. And I know for the rest of my life, I'm going to be keeping up with these things because I want to live an inspired life.
Well, and I smile because as I've thought about myself and my own things and talked to other people, one of the really cool things that happens is, and we can use anxiety, when you start to feel that anxiety, instead of, as you say, and I really appreciate what you said there about the focus, rather than focus on the anxiety, it's just like, oh, I'm starting to feel anxious. You smile about it. It says, okay, so here's where I'm going to go. And so you develop a sense of humor about those emotions, those negative emotions that you're feeling, because you can consciously recognize. And here's the interesting thing: you consciously control your unconscious.
Yes. You consciously, yes. It's funny though. I like, if I just want to go back to what you just said, because I really want to impress upon what you said about making humor out of it. I do not consider it my anxiety anymore, but it took me a while. And the way I got rid of it was I called my anxiety George. And so every time I started feeling anxiety, I'd say, here comes George again. And it would make me laugh. And that means that every time I started feeling anxious, I would have a little bit of a giggle. And that helped me break it, because it wasn't me anymore. And it was a bit of humor involved in it. And so I think it's a really good point that you start to break your patterns as soon as you are conscious of them, and as soon as you don't take them as seriously in that respect. You want to give a little bit of levity to it so that you can start to calm the physiological response. So I think it's a great point to add humor.
Well, and I like that idea. In fact, I'm going to actually write this down, break the pattern. I think that's a wonderful concept to look at rather than calling them habits, just calling them patterns. These are the patterns in our lives. And can I break that pattern? Well, this is absolutely fascinating. So, Mark, share with the audience, how do they get in contact with you? How do they find your course? Because this course sounds just fascinating. How do they find your book?
Yeah, sure. I appreciate that. Well, the Coherence Revolution is launching in the end of January, January 31st. There's going to be at least once a month, the course is going to start. So there'll be a new course every month. It's a 6-week course. So it's once a week for 6 weeks. And as I said, we dive into all the concepts of the book and how to do HeartMath and how to create this daily time schedule and start practicing the emotions of your future. So if you go to www.coherencerevolution.com/2022. So coherencerevolution.com/2022. If you go there, you're going to be able to get a free ebook. There's a little code, so you can just put that in and you can download the book. It won't cost you anything, and hopefully you can get right to it and start reading it. And there'll also be a code there if you want to take the course for 50% off. So if you want to do the course right now, there's a good code there that you can go use, and you'll be able to get it for half price. And if you want to reach out, our email is there, support@coherencerevolution.com. You can always email me, ask me any questions you want. But I really encourage people to go and get the book and start to change their lives.
So is it a live course or is it just a bunch of videos? Okay.
No, it's a live course, and people, if you can show up live, great. The replay will be up within a couple of days. You have access to the back-end member area forever. So you can go through the course as many times as you'd like. There's a workbook that comes with it, and it'll guide you through all of it. And it's really a lot of fun because there's breakout rooms where you start to practice your emotional state. There's breakout rooms where you get to try out how it feels to be coherent and incoherent, right? We have people that give each other permission to look at each other in the eye through Zoom and say, I love you, and just feel how it feels. And then, I hate you, and see how that feels, because we're learning, how does the words we use, how does the world around us affect us? And so with the breakout rooms, we're able to utilize them to practice emotion, to practice some of these things that you really haven't been aware of in your daily life. So the 6 weeks gives us that live interactive coaching aspect to it, which has been so beneficial.
Oh, that's wonderful. Mark, thank you so much. What a great interview this has been. I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts and being very, very, transparent about what you've experienced as well as what this course is all about. So I really appreciate you being on the show. And
You're
folks,
very welcome. It was great.
Go to the website. I can tell you, I already am really aware of how valuable this can be in our lives. And so, Mark, thanks for being on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Folks, thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed it, and go to the website if you're experiencing any kind of emotion that you wish you didn't. So this is Dr. Doug. Have a wonderful week, and we'll look forward to having you join us again soon.